Just past midnight on October 21, 2025, the sky over Bryansk lit up, not from fireworks, but from one of Ukraine's most daring deep strike operations yet. A wave of missiles, including the British-supplied Storm Shadows, tore through Russian air defenses and zeroed in on the Bryansk Chemical Plant, a key producer of gunpowder, explosives, and rocket propellants that feed Moscow's war machine. Within minutes, the quiet industrial zone turned into a firestorm visible for miles. For Kiev, this was more than a strike. It was saying, if you build the weapons that bomb our cities, nowhere is safe anymore. The attack was not just a gamble, it was a carefully orchestrated joint operation involving Ukraine's air, ground, and naval forces, designed to slip past radars and hit where it hurts most, that is Russia's military backbone. But the question is, how did Ukraine manage to break through one of Russia's most fortified air defense networks, and what really unfolded behind that glowing horizon in Bryansk? Let me walk you through the operation. The Bryansk strike read like a long, careful chess game, where every move had been rehearsed, timed, and cross-checked. Kiev's planners did not seek spectacle. They wanted a precise change on the board. Interrupt a factory that makes explosives and rocket propellant, render key production lines unusable for days, and force Moscow to shift attention, workforce, and spare parts away from the front. What unfolded over a single night and the early morning hours was a layered operation, driven by intelligence, long-range firepower, and a steady appetite for small, decisive gains. Days before the missiles left their silos, analysts mapped the plant down to its wiring closets. The Bryansk Chemical Plant was not a single building. It was a network of processing halls, storage bunkers, loading bays, and pipelines. Some sections produced gunpowder. Other mixed propellant compounds are used in various rockets and artillery rounds. Satellite photos and open-source imagery showed delivery trucks, a narrow railway spur, and a cluster of storage tanks. Human sources and intercepted logistics messages added the rest. Production cycles, shift rosters, and windows when maintenance crews left sections open for repairs. That combined picture is where the attack began. The planners worked backward from the effect they wanted. The mission was not to level a complex. It was to break specific production steps that would take time, require technical skill, and involve imported parts to restore. That meant hitting mixers, drying tunnels, and electrical control centers, the systems that cannot be quickly patched with glue and wire. Storm Shadow cruise missiles were chosen because they fly low, avoid radar sweeps, and strike hardened points with surgical precision. Aircraft were paired with standoff missiles to complicate local defenses. Naval and ground forces provided support capacity and redundancy if plans changed. On the evening before the strike, electronic surveillance teams tuned their nets. They listened for generator refuels, for maintenance chatter, and for the idiosyncratic beeps and tones that accompany industrial controls. They plotted the cadence of shift changes and noted when security patrols shortened their rounds. The aim was to find a narrow time window when the plant would be most vulnerable and when local air defenses were either distracted or repositioned. At 9 p.m., reconnaissance drones and long-range patrols took their places. High-altitude assets painted a moving picture of the area. Low-flying drones skirted the countryside to study approach corridors and confirm thermal signatures at night. Analysts layered those live feeds over fresh satellite passes, maps on operators' screens filled with color, hotspots where night lighting marked active sectors, gray zones where power seemed low, and green lanes that showed routes aircraft and missiles could thread through. Around 12:30 a.m., the first wave began to move. Storm Shadow missiles launched from long range on pre-programmed paths. Their flight profiles hugged terrain to reduce radar detection, following valleys and tree lines. Support aircraft took up positions well outside the immediate air defense umbrella. The plan relied on timing rather than brute force. A single Storm Shadow striking a control room could force an entire plant into emergency shutdown because operators cut power and poison lines to avoid a chemical hazard. That shutdown buys time even without widespread structural damage. At the same time, reconnaissance craft painted the sky with decoys and false returns. Some drones emitted signatures that resembled incoming aircraft, while others mimicked missile glints. Local radar operators faced a crowded display, a series of moving blips without clear intent. The defenders had to choose: chase every signal and risk missing the real threat, or hold their fire and hope the most dangerous items would reveal themselves. In many cases, the decoys served their purpose. Defenders reacted to the wrong targets, which opened corridors for the strike missiles. Near the target, storm shadows switched from cruise to terminal guidance, using a mix of GPS, inertial navigation, and scene-matching cameras to home in. That last piece is essential. Scene matching lets a missile compare what it sees below with stored images, helping it find an exact rooftop or building, even if GPS is jammed. The Bryansk plant had hardened some critical areas, but hardened does not mean unbreakable. A strike precisely delivered to a mixing chamber or an electrical hub can stop a line for weeks. Footage of the strike. The first impacts arrived in a controlled sequence. Missiles hit the plant's control center, a chemical mixer hall, and a loading bay. The control center was the main objective. Once its systems went offline, the plant's automated safety programs triggered, pumps shut down, valves closed, and conveyors stopped. Previous strikes by the Storm Shadow missiles. In a matter of minutes, the plant's flow of raw materials halted. That function loss is the strategic aim. A factory operating at partial capacity can still produce components. A factory forced into a controlled shutdown cannot. Local air defenses scrambled. Surface-to-air missiles and anti-aircraft guns attempted to track the incoming profiles. In some sectors, fire control radars rotated and locked, but the evasion tactics and timing meant that interceptors arrived late or at the wrong vector. In other cases, local units fired at decoys and phantom contacts, exhausting limited interceptors on non-lethal targets. The trajectory of a storm shadow is different from that of a glide bomb or a ballistic rocket. It can approach from unexpected angles, and that complicates a defender's response. Moscow's units were competent and reacted forcefully. They sent fighters to sweep the area, and they activated mobile air defenses. But every jet scrambled cost fuel and left other sectors less watched. In parallel with the missile strikes, aircraft conducted supporting runs to divert radar attention and deliver smaller, more precise munitions to secondary targets. These were not showy attacks, but necessary ones. They severed power lines to backup generators and damaged refueling points that could otherwise fuel a rapid recovery. The combined effect was to increase the technical burden on repair teams. Inside the plant, technicians followed emergency protocols. They isolated hazardous substances, vented safe paths, and sealed off damaged compartments. That slowed outside firefighters and repair crews, because chemical sites have special safety rules. Even when a single system could be fixed, the need to ventilate tanks, test for contamination, and certify electrical safety means work takes longer. In modern industry, safety is deliberately slow. Kiev's command watched real-time telemetry and satellite overlays. Where possible, they adjusted flight paths of follow-on missiles and redirected drones to monitor repair convoys. They were careful to avoid unnecessarily threatening civilian infrastructure. Hitting a control room differs from striking living quarters. This restraint was both moral and tactical. Destroying a production line denies an enemy capacity, but killing civilians undermines strategic support and invites international backlash. As the night progressed, the defenders shifted into improvisation. Repair teams in armored vehicles moved toward the plant under air cover. Engineers tried to reroute electricity and bring portable control suites. Temporary generators rolled in. Some systems could be jury-rigged to restart small-scale production, but such fixes require spare parts, certified technicians, and time. The plant's more complicated mixers and drying tunnels cannot be replicated with field repairs. A notable move by the defenders was an attempt to create an air defense bubble using a ring of mobile systems. They repositioned short-range launchers on nearby hills and called in naval radar support from ships offshore. The idea was to deploy multiple sensing modalities in the area to make approaching missiles visible in at least one channel. It worked in part, but it took hours to position, and it drained fuel and attention. Each reposition is a tax on readiness elsewhere. Another problem was logistics. Some components used in the plant are specialized and sourced from abroad. Sanctions and supply restrictions limit how fast Moscow can replenish certain valves, mixing blades, and electronic control boards. Even if a repair ship arrived tomorrow, it might carry standard pumps and not the bespoke control units the plant used. That mismatch turns a repair into a logistical puzzle rather than a simple wrench twiddle. Throughout the strike, Ukraine's forces remained vigilant against Russian countermeasures. Electronic jamming and GPS interference were expected. The Storm Shadow's scene matching and inertial guidance offered redundancy. Drones were pre-programmed with fallback routes. That posture reduced the chance that jamming would turn the entire mission into a failure. By dawn, the immediate kinetic action wound down. The plant's automated safeties and the targeted hits had done their job. Key production lines were offline. The control center's systems needed complete diagnostics. A few small fires smoldered in protected containment areas, and emergency teams worked in chemical suits, moving with care. The night's operations had not aimed to raise the site. The goal was to stop production in a way that would require expertise and parts to restart. What made the operation enjoyable was the choice of angles and timing. Kyiv did not simply rely on a single method. It layered long-range missiles, aircraft support, decoy drones, and electronic attack in a choreography designed to overwhelm decision cycles. Not necessarily hardware, the defenders were not incompetent. They were forced into a series of costly decisions. Each time they committed a jet or a mobile launcher, they drew resources from somewhere else. The chessboard shifted. Commands in Moscow ordered reserve units forward, assigned technician teams to the Bryansk site, and demanded rapid restoration of air defenses in neighboring regions. Those moves had costs. Pilots logged extra flight hours, and maintenance cycles increased. Supplies that might have gone to other fronts were diverted. Strategically, that was a win for Kyiv. To force the opponent to reallocate scarce resources. The operation also showed the evolving nature of modern strikes, where once massed artillery or bomber raids dominated. Now a handful of long-range, precision-guided weapons, supported by cheap drones and smart intelligence, could make a strategic dent. A single well-placed missile, combined with timely drone observation, can stop a line for days. The economy of force favors the side that can integrate data, timing, and reach. In the control centers after the strike, analysts replayed feeds and cataloged lessons. Which decoys had worked best? Which corridors were most exposed, and where defenders had shown predictable responses, those notes would inform the next mission. War at this level is iterative. Each operation tests defenses, records reactions, and reveals a pattern to be exploited later. For those who watched from a distance, the night looked like a series of bright strikes, and then a settling of smoke. For planners and technicians, it was a study in timing and logistics, a small campaign within a single night. The Bryansk action did not end the war. It shaped a part of it. It took a vital node out of the supply chain for a period long enough to force choices and costs. In the end, the strike was a lesson in trade-offs. Kyiv accepted limited kinetic force to achieve an operational pause. Moscow had to accept the temporary loss of a production site and the cost of patching it under pressure. The game continued, with new positions and new vulnerabilities revealed. The next move will depend on which side can better turn short-term effects into long-term advantage. When the smoke and lights faded over Bryansk, it was clear the strike had done more than punch holes in a factory. Ukraine hit a node of Russia's munitions supply chain, striking mixers, control rooms, and feed systems that keep propellant lines running. Storm Shadow missiles and supporting aircraft forced automated shutdowns, tripped safety systems, and left key production stages offline. That kind of damage is not fixed with a wrench and an afternoon. Replacements for specialty valves, control boards, and processing blades are slow to source under sanctions. Moscow responded by rushing repair crews, moving air defenses closer to the site, and reassigning rail and truck shipments of spare parts. Those moves protect the plant but create gaps elsewhere. In short, the strike cost Russia time, technicians, and logistical bandwidth, while Kyiv bought a pause in the flow of powders and propellants that fuel missiles and shells. For most people, this reads like one bold night strike. For planners, it is a strategic nudge. Stop the factory, slow the supply, force the enemy to reshuffle. Bryansk will not stay the same tomorrow. The real question is this: can Russia patch the system fast enough to keep firing? Or has Kiev bought enough time to change the next phase of the war? If this story gave you a clearer view of how wars are really fought today, press subscribe and stay tuned for more updates from the front lines.